So tell me a little bit about this week's testimony. Let's start with it featured a voice that hasn't been heard in nearly 2 years, that of Neil Clark. What did he have to say?
We heard a lot from Neil Clark yesterday. I would say that all told, recordings in meetings and phone calls of Mr. Clark, we probably heard an hour of him speaking yesterday, and he dominated every conversation he was involved in. He said that he was Larry Householder's proxy on the House Bill 6 effort, and that they were moving it through the legislature. They had difficulties in the Senate, and then they fought the repeal initiative.
Now, dark money donations are legal, but it seemed like there was an attempt to try to connect the pay to play scheme aspect of this through what Clark was saying.
Yes, in fact, there was a meeting that was set up by undercover FBI agents that Larry Householder attended back in 2019. And there's conversation about how dark money that was allowed by the 2010 Supreme Court Citizens United decision really made things dirtier than what they were. There's just all this dark money that what makes it dark money is the donors don't have to be disclosed. So corporations could funnel unlimited amounts of money into these accounts. And then it went to politics. And as Clark said in one of these conversations, the politicians themselves had total deniability. They could say they just didn't know who contributed to that fund.
And Householder was not the only politician that was referenced. Clark talked about Governor Mike DeWine, for instance.
He did talk about Governor Mike DeWine. In fact, he used the number $3 million in connection with First Energy. So these are huge amounts of money.
And he also said, from the accounts that I've seen, that it was Householder who went to war for First Energy. And even though Mike DeWine signed House Bill 6, he was not the warrior for First Energy that Householder was.
No, in fact, Clark, and you have to take the things that he says with a grain of salt. That was some of the testimony today. If you're a lobbyist, it's certainly in your interest to, play up your own influence. But he said that DeWine, when he thought that Householder didn't have the votes to pass House Bill 6, the utility bailout, he walked away from it. And then Householder came up with the votes. And according to Clark, DeWine then wanted to be bailed back in.
One of the other things Clark has revealed, allegedly Householder was angry over the House Bill 6 vote and threatened or was trying to spike a bill that the undercover FBI agents were saying that they wanted, as they were posing as Cincinnati hotel developers.
That's exactly right. They were hotel developers, they said, and they wanted to have sports gambling in their hotels. So there was a bill that was brought by Representative Dave Greenspan, but then Greenspan was a no vote on House Bill 6. And so in the way that Clark described Householder was this guy that had a really long memory. And if you ever crossed him, just forget about getting anything through his chamber again.
And that brings up the whole idea that this House Bill 6 case was kind of discovered almost by accident, in that the FBI agents were actually working on another case.
That's right. They were up on sports gambling. I think I could be wrong about this, but I think they just anticipated that when the Supreme Court said it was okay for states to do sports gambling, that there'd just be all sorts of money flooding into the zone. I don't think that's a bad assumption. So that's, I think, where their investigation started. And then they got a wiretap warrant on Neil Clark, and they started hearing all this stuff about House Bill 6 and First Energy and the bailout.
Where did the cross-examination go when they were dealing with this witness that was testifying on tape?
Basically, they said that, the thrust is that this is Neil Clark. He had an interest in exaggerating his influence, and that you don't hear much of Larry Householder saying, yeah, if you give me this money, I'm going to give you your bailout. And that's the circle that everybody's still waiting for the prosecution to close, because householders or lawyers are saying, dark money, it's all perfectly legal, and we're not hearing this quid pro quo yet. So, but there's still a couple more weeks of testimony we have.
And Neil Clark was not the only lobbyist heard this week. Lobbyist Juan Cespedes, who has also pleaded guilty in this case. Neil Clark maintained his innocence before he died by suicide. But Juan Cespedes did testify this week for the prosecution as part of his guilty plea.
And Cespedes said that it was very clear to him that this was a quid pro quo, that Larry Householder was getting money into this dark money group, Generation Now, which has pleaded guilty, from First Energy. And in exchange, Householder was going to pass this $1.3 billion bailout.
So what's next? What do we have to look forward to in the trial as it continues on?
Well, Jeff Longstreth, who operated as Larry Householder's right-hand man, is yet to testify. There are a couple of people, we don't know who they are, have been granted immunity. So among the press anyway, there's furious speculation about whether that includes any First Energy executives or anything like that. So we're still waiting for the smoking gun testimony.